Imagine a charismatic politician steps onto the world stage and actually achieves what everyone thought was impossible: global peace.
Right, like the ultimate dream.
Exactly. The treaties are signed, the borders are secure, and humanity takes this massive collective sigh of relief. But now imagine that just months later, that same quote-unquote peace directly results in a quarter of the Earth's population dying.
Wow.
Yeah, dying in a horrific cascade of war, famine, and disease. Today's deep dive is about, well, probably the most terrifying, intensely debated roadmap of the future ever written. We are unpacking the revelation of Jesus Christ to St. John the Divine.
And, before we take a single step into this narrative, let us establish the ground rules for the journey, because in this deep dive, we are not taking sides.
Right, absolutely not.
We are not endorsing any specific religious doctrines, and we are absolutely not in the business of trying to predict the future. Our mission here is to impartially map out the ideas, the themes, and this incredibly vivid progression contained in the original source material.
Treating it basically as a profound literary and prophetic blueprint, right?
Exactly, because we are tracking a chronological roadmap that goes from a fragile geopolitical collapse straight through to absolute totalitarian control. And it culminates in a literal cosmic renewal, where the very physical laws of the universe get rewritten.
It is a massive, staggering narrative for you to wrap your head around. And like every good dystopian nightmare, it all kicks off with a false utopia.
Yeah, the initial phase of this unraveling begins with the emergence of a conquering major political or military power. You have this singular, charismatic world leader who initiates a massive campaign of expansion.
But not with tanks, right?
No, that's the thing. His primary weapon of conquest isn't military might at first, it is diplomacy. He establishes broad control by offering peace and stability to a really desperate world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that promised stability shatters almost immediately. The narrative throws a total curveball here. It pivots from this global diplomatic triumph to large-scale, regional, and possibly global wars.
Right, the peace just evaporates.
It just vanishes. Massive political upheaval sweeps the globe. So why does a campaign built on the promise of peace suddenly result in a 25% global mortality rate?
Well, the underlying mechanism here is the sheer danger of forced political centralization. When a regime consolidates global power under the guise of peace, it rarely resolves the actual underlying conflicts.
It just kind of papers over them.
Precisely. It merely suppresses natural geopolitical fault lines. So when that artificial suppression inevitably fails, the resulting conflicts are not just isolated border skirmishes, they are massive systemic shocks.
It's a complete system failure.
Yeah, and the narrative draws a direct, chilling line between this centralized overreach and deep resource vulnerability.
It's like, think about a modern supply chain, right? Like when one major canal gets blocked by a single cargo ship.
Oh, right.
And suddenly half the world is rationing fuel and microchips. Only here, in this text, the blockage isn't an accident. It's a fundamental feature of the regime's failure.
That's a perfect analogy. Because the realism of this progression, it really mirrors the darkest chapters of human history. When global war erupts, it immediately destroys agricultural hubs and supply lines.
Right, because armies need to eat, and fields become battlegrounds.
Exactly. The direct mechanism of war breeds famine. The source material describes staple foods becoming impossibly expensive for average citizens, which creates a massive economic divide.
A day's wage for a loaf of bread, basically.
Yes, and famine then weakens the immune systems of vast populations, which inevitably breeds widespread disease. So humanity's attempt to force a centralized utopia creates the exact conditions for its own mass destruction.
Which is just so bleak. But as these human-engineered geopolitical systems fail, John's vision actually forces us to look upward. The crisis escapes the political arena because the physical planet itself begins to rebel against its inhabitants.
It shifts from a human failing to a full-on cosmic pushback.
Yeah, and this shift coincides with a severe escalation in human cruelty, doesn't it?
It does. The regime begins intensely persecuting Christians and faithful minorities who just refuse to assimilate into this new centralized power structure.
So while that systemic oppression is happening on the ground, the sky literally starts falling. I mean, we are talking about super earthquakes that move mountains and islands.
The scale of destruction is just hard to fathom.
It really is a terrifying atmospheric darkening where the sun and moon are eclipsed. It reads like the ultimate disaster movie where the environment itself is weaponized against humanity. But I want to push back on the sequence of events here.
Go ahead.
Why does the narrative put human-made war and famine first and then unleash this total environmental collapse? How do those two things actually connect?
What's fascinating here is the indiscriminate nature of the cosmic panic that follows. When those super earthquakes hit and the sky goes completely dark, wealth and political power suddenly mean absolutely nothing.
Right, money can't stop an earthquake.
Exactly. The narrative specifically points out that kings, generals, and the ultra-rich hide in caves alongside the poor. It turns out, a luxury doomsday bunker in New Zealand doesn't do you much good when the actual tectonic plate it's sitting on decides to shatter.
Oh, wow. So the environment is being used to humble human arrogance.
Precisely. The timeline juxtaposes the cruelty of the human regime with the overwhelming, totally untamable power of the cosmos. As earthly authorities attempt to play God by persecuting those who won't bow to them, well, the universe responds by demonstrating just how fragile human authority actually is.
Yet, right in the very middle of this indiscriminate environmental terror, the narrative introduces this really highly specific detail. A distinct group of God-serving people are quote-unquote marked.
Yes, the 144,000, usually.
Right. They receive some sort of divine protection on their foreheads that shields them from the specific ecological judgments that are about to hit.
And you have to contrast that protected group with the narrative's mention of a massive influx of new believers from every ethnic background.
Because they have a very different experience.
Entirely different. These new converts do not receive that physical protection. They die in the unfolding crises, facing execution or starvation, and are then gathered into this massive, heavenly multitude.
So the narrative basically splits human experience right down the middle here. On one side, the unaligned world is in an absolute panic over just physical survival.
Utter terror.
Yeah. And on the other side, there is this profound spiritual resilience. Some are physically protected to endure, while others face physical death but achieve a kind of spiritual victory.
And the physical conditions on Earth, they only deteriorate further from here. The next phase introduces total ecological ruin.
Like it wasn't bad enough already.
Right. Violent storms and fire consume a third of the world's trees and vegetation. A major impact event, often described as a burning mountain crashing into the sea, devastates ocean ecosystems and cripples maritime trade.
And the water goes bad too, right?
Yes, a third of the freshwater supplies are poisoned, turning bitter and totally lethal.
Followed by prolonged atmospheric dimming that would just completely disrupt the global climate and agriculture. It is an absolute unmitigated catastrophe.
Which perfectly explains human behavior in the next phase.
Right, because out of that environmental terror arises this desperate, agonizing demand for order. When you and your family are starving and terrified of the sky, you will hand over your freedom to literally anyone who promises to turn the lights back on.
Extreme vulnerability leads directly to extreme oppression. As the ecological disasters continue, these tormenting plagues emerge. The psychological state of humanity reaches such a pitch of absolute desperation that people literally wish for death.
But they can't die, right?
Right. The text specifically notes that death eludes them. And out of this utter misery, another colossal multinational war erupts, killing roughly a third of the remaining human population.
Okay, so let's focus on how the dominant regime handles dissenting voices during all this chaos. Because the narrative introduces two prominent prophetic figures right in the middle of Jerusalem.
The two witnesses.
Yeah, and these two publicly confront the global system. They perform undeniable, striking signs, and they warn of divine judgment. Now, to a totalitarian regime trying to project absolute control, these two guys are a massive PR nightmare.
Totalitarianism requires a monopoly on truth and power. I mean, if two dissenting voices can command the weather or call down plagues, the regime's illusion of ultimate authority is completely broken.
So they have to go.
Yes, exactly. That is why the ruling power eventually executes them right in the streets of Jerusalem.
And the narrative explicitly notes that their deaths are celebrated globally. Like, people actually send gifts to each other because these prophets were tormenting them with a guilty conscience, not to mention actual physical plagues.
It's a global holiday of relief, basically.
Yeah, but then 3.5 days later, they are dramatically resurrected and taken up into heaven in full view of their enemies. I mean, consider the psychological impact of that. A globally televised resurrection completely shatters a dictator's most potent weapon.
The finality of death. And that public defeat, it forces the regime to tighten its grip even further. Out of this chaos rises a dominant global ruler, commonly identified as the Antichrist. This figure consolidates an international coalition and assumes near total authority over global politics, economics, and military forces.
But he doesn't rule through brute force alone, does he? He operates alongside a powerful ideological leader known as the false prophet.
Right? There's a propagandist.
Exactly. He performs his own impressive signs and miracles, enforcing this unified global belief system that practically worships the political leader.
It is the ultimate fusion of state and ideology. The political strongman provides the security, or the illusion of it, while the false prophet manipulates the culture. He uses spectacle and coerced devotion to enforce total compliance.
Here's where it gets really interesting for anyone listening today in our modern digital age. To enforce this loyalty, the false prophet implements a comprehensive economic control mechanism.
Famously known as the mark of the beard.
Yes. It is a mandatory identifier required on the right hand or the forehead. No one can legally buy or sell anything without being registered and approved within this system.
And, the architecture of that control is brilliant in its sheer cruelty. You do not need to waste resources hunting down every political dissident or religious objector.
You just cut off their wallet.
Precisely. If you control the distribution of food in a world already ravaged by famine and ecological collapse, you simply revoke an individual's right to participate in commerce. You literally starve them into compliance.
I mean, think about how much of your life is tied up in digital banking right now. If your accounts were frozen today, if your credit cards just stopped working at the grocery store, how long would you survive?
Not long at all.
Right. This ancient text isn't just describing some mystical tattoo, it is outlining a terrifyingly modern concept of freezing someone out of the global economy with the flip of a switch.
It forces a choice between ideological loyalty and physical survival. The mark represents absolute submission to the regime in exchange for the basic right to eat.
But absolute centralized power almost always commits a fatal overreach. And this regime is no exception. The narrative shifts into a period often called the Great Tribulation.
The intensity really ramps up here.
It does. It's triggered when the global ruler commits a deeply blasphemous act in a central holy place, likely a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. He breaks prior peace agreements and launches an extreme targeted persecution against faithful believers and the Jewish people.
That specific act of hubris crosses a hard divine line. The pushback is immediate. And unlike the earlier indiscriminate ecological disasters, these final rapid-fire judgments are devastatingly targeted.
Right. The narrative describes agonizing afflictions striking only those who aligned with the global system and accepted the mark. The oceans don't just suffer, they completely die, turning into something resembling coagulated blood.
Which is a horrifying image.
Truly. And the remaining freshwater rivers become totally undrinkable. The sun's heat intensifies to lethal levels, literally scorching the earth.
And then, the core territories, the actual seat of the global government, are plunged into deep, miserable darkness. The infrastructure of the totalitarian state is being systematically dismantled by cosmic forces it simply cannot control or negotiate with.
Geopolitically, the world just fractures. Massive Eastern armies mobilize and march toward the Middle East. The narrative describes deceptive spiritual forces deliberately rallying the world's leaders into a final, suicidal military confrontation in a region known as Armageddon.
The climax of human conflict.
But while the armies are gathering for war, a fatal blow is dealt to the global economy. A central hub of economic, cultural, and religious corruption is utterly destroyed in a single hour. The text calls this entity Babylon the Great.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the concept of Babylon is one of the most profound critiques of exploitative commerce in all of ancient literature.
Wait, so this Babylon isn't necessarily just a physical place with brick walls? It functions as a deeply networked global market.
Yes, it is the ultimate engine of supply chain ethics, totally devoid of morality. The text literally lists the cargo of Babylon: gold, silver, fine linens, wine, oil, horses, chariots, and finally, human bodies and souls.
Wow, treating people like cargo.
Exactly. Babylon represents a system that reduces human life to a mere commodity for profit. So when it falls, it triggers a catastrophic worldwide financial collapse.
The political leaders, the merchants, the sea captains, they all stand at a distance in anguished mourning. But they aren't mourning the loss of human life, are they?
Oh, not at all.
They are mourning because their wealth and their supply chains just evaporated overnight. Their ultimate loyalty was never to the global ruler or the ideology. It was always to their profit margins.
So with the economic engine destroyed and humanity gathered on the brink of total self-annihilation at Armageddon, the narrative reaches its absolute climax. It pivots from destruction to decisive, permanent intervention.
Right. At the peak of this chaotic assembly, Jesus Christ returns visibly. He doesn't return as a peaceful teacher riding a donkey this time. He returns as a conquering king, accompanied by heavenly armies.
The contrast is striking.
It is. He directly intervenes in human history, easily and decisively destroying the gathered military forces opposing him.
And the global ruler, the Antichrist, and his chief propagandist, the false prophet, are captured alive. They are stripped of all power and consigned to irrevocable, permanent punishment. Their seemingly invincible regime is dismantled in an instant.
And the spiritual force behind them is dealt with too.
Yes. Furthermore, Satan, the ultimate spiritual adversary manipulating this global deception, is bound and confined so he can no longer influence the nations.
This intervention ushers in a 1,000-year kingdom of peace and justice. Christ rules, and the faithful believers who were martyred by the regime are resurrected to share in governing this newly stabilized world.
There's always a but.
Yeah, after 1,000 years of an extended era of peace, the narrative throws one final, massive curveball. Satan is briefly released from his confinement. He successfully incites one last widespread rebellion among the nations, gathers forces for a final assault on the capital, and then is immediately destroyed by fire from heaven and permanently judged.
It's a shocking twist for a lot of readers.
It really is. So what does this all mean? Why would the narrative include this 1,000-year pause and one final rebellion? Why not just skip straight to the perfect eternal ending right after Armageddon?
Well, analytically, it functions as a sort of controlled variable experiment on human nature. It exposes the text's view on the stubborn, deep-rooted persistence of human rebellion.
How so?
It suggests that even after 1,000 years of perfect environmental conditions, perfect justice, and visible divine rule, a segment of humanity will still choose rebellion if deception is reintroduced.
That's a dark view of human nature.
It is, but it definitively proves that humanity's failures were not just the result of bad circumstances or corrupt politicians or economic scarcity. The root issue is an internal inclination to rebel. And that root has to be definitively exposed and eradicated before eternity can actually begin.
Wow. It completely dismantles the idea that a perfect environment automatically creates perfect people. And once that final rebellion is dealt with, we arrive at the universal final judgment.
The Great White Throne.
Exactly. Everyone who wasn't part of the earlier resurrection stands before a great white throne. The dead are judged according to their deeds, and those not found in the book of life are separated into eternal punishment.
Which finally clears the canvas for the grand finale. The narrative must resolve all the trauma, the ecological ruin, and the political oppression we have tracked so far.
And it does. The present corrupted reality is entirely replaced. We see a new heaven and a new earth, centered on a glorious, radiant city called the New Jerusalem coming down from God.
It's a beautiful image.
It really is. The text promises that there is no more death, no sorrow, no crying, and no pain. The curse that caused the ecological and human decay is just gone. Believers enjoy unbroken fellowship with the divine, continuous access to the tree of life for ultimate healing and absolute security.
It is the ultimate restoration of the human experience. It isn't just the absence of totalitarianism or environmental collapse. It is the active, vibrant presence of total perfection.
It is a mind-bending, epic progression. We've mapped out a journey for you today that starts with a deceptive geopolitical peace, plummets through terrifying ecological collapse and the ultimate totalitarian nightmare, and finally breaks through into cosmic justice and a radically renewed universe.
And whether you approach this text as ancient theology, a masterful piece of epic literature, or just a mirror reflecting our very modern anxieties about digital surveillance, ecology, and concentrated power, its narrative structure is deeply provocative and foundational to Western culture.
It challenges everything we think we know about the future. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on that ultimate conclusion. As we noted, the text describes this final new heaven and earth as having absolutely no pain, no sorrow, and no death. But it also specifically notes that believers will engage in meaningful, joyful service and reign forever.
And they're just sitting around.
Exactly. Think about that for a second. If ultimate perfection isn't just depicted as floating idly on a cloud playing a harp, but rather actively working, serving, and ruling without the exhausting burden of corruption or greed, what exactly does an eternity of perfect, sorrow-free work actually look like? It kind of makes you rethink that desire for a life of total leisure, doesn't it? Only this time, the blueprint you are building from is guaranteed never to fail.